But right now, just monitoring Dragon as it cruises in autonomously for that docking a little bit later tonight.
And you can see that live view and a beautiful view at that of Dragon Endurance as it approaches the International Space Station. Now these views are being captured by cameras on the International Space Station, which is Dragon's target for today. And the International Space Station and Dragon are currently flying about 260 statute miles over the Indian Ocean. And so after CHOP, and as we make that initial capture and the grand arrival, when Crew-10 arrives at the space station, Dragon will fly in and make contact with those international docking adapters, giving us what we call soft capture. And the soft capture ring then retracts until sensors indicate it's time for 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6, to drive in place to give us a hard capture and firmly secure Dragon to its new home on the space station. Then the station crew, namely NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, will manually pressurize the vestibule or the...
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Ground has pulled go for approach 0 and enabled the maneuver. Expected maneuver start time is approximately 0321 Zulu. Reminder that Dragon will nominally continue its approach through waypoint 1 towards waypoint 2 without stopping.
Dragon copies and go for approach 0.
And there we just heard some conversations between that core crew operations resource engineer here at SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne and NASA astronaut and Crew-10 commander Ann McClain. They were talking about approaching waypoint 0. They had that go, no-go poll. Again, those are joint polls between the SpaceX team in Hawthorne as well as NASA's team in Houston, just to verify that all systems on Dragon, all systems on the space station look good and they can proceed past that waypoint 0 that we were just talking about. And so once we do have that docking and we have that hard capture, they will begin the pressurization process of the vestibule, and that is the area between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch that was previously exposed to the vacuum of space. And then umbilicals that provide power, audio, and data connections from station to Dragon are put in place, and then there will be a series of leak checks before the hatches are finally open, welcoming Crew-10 aboard the International Space Station as part of Expedition 72. And that hatch opening is slated to take place about an hour and a half or so after we get that docking later today. And so following a liftoff yesterday at 7:03 p.m. Eastern, 4:03 p.m. Pacific, a lot has happened since then. So there was that 9-minute ride to orbit before we had that orbital insertion and Dragon flying free. And there you see Dragon flying free continuing to on your screen following that about 28-hour journey.
Station Houston on the big loop. Expect to start monitoring Dragon in approximately 35 minutes.
And there you heard some additional call-ups to the crew, this time to the International Space Station crew. Again, we mentioned earlier, they're all talking on what is known as the big loop. So all 4 parties that are involved in today's operation, so the Dragon crew, the space station crew, the SpaceX team, as well as the NASA team and their mission control, they're all talking on one loop. So that specific call out was up to the space station crew because today we will have NASA astronaut Nick Hague monitoring Dragon's approach. And so they were just saying that there's about 35 minutes before that monitoring will begin taking place by NASA astronaut Nick Hague.
And we've talked, that's part of what we've talked about that cooperative element of the docking sequence. While Dragon can do this autonomously, there's folks here at SpaceX Mission Control in the ISS flight control room and on board the ISS, making sure that, just monitoring, again, making sure everything is going as we want it to today. And you can see there, Dragon kind of exiting off the top of your screen. The camera will pick it up again there as Dragon goes over Earth there. You can see its nose cone opened up, and that you can see the forward docking adapter there, which is what is aimed at camera right now. And that nose cone was over that docking apparatus during liftoff to help protect it from the aerodynamic forces and some of that heating that Dragon experiences as it heads uphill into space.
So yesterday, after we had liftoff and that orbital insertion, and after that nose cone was opened, that nose cone that you were just mentioning, Chris, that is actually when the zero-G indicator was revealed. So NASA astronaut Anne McClain revealed Crew-10 zero gravity indicator, and it was a crochet origami crane, which is an international symbol of peace and unity. So NASA astronaut Anne McClain provided some really lovely words on that zero gravity indicator, and those zero gravity indicators have quite the history. Many crews before them have had their own zero-G indicators, and so that specific crane was actually hand crocheted, and it also they also mentioned the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Apollo-Soyuz as part of that zero-G indicator rollout.
That's right, 50 years this year.
So a lot of milestones this year in the space world: 50 years of Apollo-Soyuz, 25 years of International Space Station continuous human presence. There's a lot that's happened and a lot to look forward to, especially with all of the commercial space activity going on so far this year and into the future.
That's true, and SpaceX right in there with you. Crew-10 actually lifting off on the 23rd anniversary of SpaceX's founding. As well. And that zero-G indicator, too, one thing I really liked about it is its name was Drug, which was the Russian name for friend. And as Commander Anne McClain said, it is a nod to the unique and deep cultural traditions from which each of us come. So noting the very international nature of this crew.
And so some of the previous indicators, so Crew-9, who is obviously currently on board the International Space Station, their indicator was actually a plush baby falcon named Aurora. So it previously flew on 2 Russian Soyuz capsules, including the flight that resulted in an emergency abort that NASA astronaut Nick Hague was actually a part of. And so Nick Hague is now going to be monitoring today's approach, and he will also return home after that handover period with Crew-9 back to Earth.
And, you know, as we're talking about zero-G indicators, I got to say my favorite is the little plushy Earth that went up on the Demo 1 mission. You know, we talked a little bit earlier, Anne McClain was on the space station when Dragon arrived for its uncrewed Demo 1 test flight, paved the way for all of these crew rotation flights for NASA and for Axiom Space as well. And that little plushy Earth, oh man, I smiled a lot looking at Anne's smile when she saw that sitting inside the Dragon capsule. And then you can see Anne there on the right-hand box. Anne is on the left-hand side working on that tablet right now. Now a view of the International Space Station. So this is cool. You've got the ISS looking down at Dragon on your left, and you've got Dragon looking up at the ISS on your right. I mean, the views don't get much better than that, except for maybe the 4 people who are in Dragon.
And so the International Space Station and Dragon are currently flying just off the coast of Australia, again, as they make that, or as Dragon makes its final approach to the International Space Station. So Dragon is currently about 560 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing to close in. Again, we recently did have that go past that waypoint 0. So next up will be that waypoint 1 that we expect in just a few minutes.
Yeah, and from that initial test flight that Dragon did in March of 2019, that was then followed in May of 2020. Kind of hard to believe we're also approaching the 5-year anniversary of Dragon human spaceflight missions as well this year. We had that Demo 2 mission with Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley launching in May of 2020 and coming back a couple of months later in August. And then we started those crew rotation missions for the commercial crew program for NASA in November of that year with our Crew-1 crew and Dragon. And since that point, there's always been a Dragon at the International Space Station.
And so we did mention earlier there are currently 4 Dragons that are active. So they're flying today on the Dragon spacecraft Endurance. And typically whenever there is a new Dragon, the crew gets to name it. And so we have Endurance, Resilience, Endeavor, Freedom.
And Freedom, yes.
And also, so we talked a little bit about the zero gravity indicator. The crew also works to design their mission patch ahead of each mission, and so that also dates back. It has quite a history with those mission patches. So the SpaceX Crew-10 patch was designed by the 4-person crew. They actually used AI for some initial inspiration, and then a human artist perfected the design. So it's a 10-sided patch with the Roman numeral X boldly in the center, representing the 10th operational flight of the Dragon spacecraft. And then on the patch, the Dragon has its wings out in full flight. And it's a nod to the 4 crew members who are all professional pilots. So we mentioned that a little bit earlier when we were going through the bios of NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, as well as Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. All of them have a pilot or aviation history, so that was a little bit of a nod in their patch as well. And again, you're seeing some live views there of NASA astronaut Anne McClain and NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers to the left and right there on your screen. So Nicole Ayers is the pilot. Anne McClain is the commander for the mission today. Again, as they continue to make their way to the International Space Station for docking to that forward port. The Dragon spacecraft is currently less than 480 meters away from the International Space Station, continuing to make its approach.
And you know, we're seeing these views from Dragon looking up at the International Space Station. And this Dragon vehicle is actually the second design of the Dragon that we have had. We started with a cargo vehicle, and we actually have the first one hanging right here behind me today. And honestly, what I love about this, watching Crew-10 approach the ISS, the 14th Dragon human spaceflight mission to the space station, and that very first Dragon that was only carrying cargo, we put a window in it, not because we had to, but because we wanted to symbolize that one day we will be carrying crew, and one day we will be doing exactly what we are doing here today. And just kind of gives me goosebumps to look at Dragon 1 versus the new shiny Dragon we got.
And so obviously they've had that 28-hour flight, and I'm sure they've been able to take advantage of looking out those windows and the amazing views of Earth below them as they make their way to the International Space Station, which there you can see a view of the International Space Station on your screen. Again, those views are captured by the cameras on Dragon. So this is basically a point of view of Dragon looking at the International Space Station.
And you can see there, you know, you've got if you sort of look at the space station and how it's oriented right now, you've got a small bar that sort of goes across the top. Those are the European and Japanese modules of the space station. You've got the US and Russian modules sort of going down in a line, forming that T, and then you have the huge solar array truss and the wings of the space station, if you will.
And so Dragon is now about 440 meters away from the International Space Station. And again, that waypoint 0 mark is at the about 400-meter point. So they should be reaching that waypoint here pretty soon. But again, they had that go, no-go pull to proceed through waypoint 0 and then on to waypoint 1. So they won't have to pause at waypoint 0 once they reach that 400-meter mark.
Which is, and that's what we were sort of saying earlier. We have these moments when we can stop to make sure that everything is in alignment. But if everything is already in alignment, there's really no reason to stop, and we can proceed forward.
And so once they do proceed forward, they'll then get to waypoint 1 and waypoint 1. So you go from 400 meters at waypoint 0, and then waypoint 1 is about 220 meters. And that's when we get to that docking axis arrival. And so they'll have that go ahead and proceed to that point. And once they are on that docking axis, it basically means they are directly in front of the port. So that forward port on node 2, the Harmony module that they will be docking to today. So Dragon will be looking directly at that International Space Station docking at port, and they can do some final alignment checks if they need to. And then from there, they will then move to waypoint 2, which is just 20 meters away. And there you can see another view of Dragon. This is a camera on the International Space Station, and they're currently flying over Sydney, Australia. So that's the International Space Station looking out at Dragon. Those cameras are actually controlled by one of the flight controllers in Mission Control in Houston. So the Cronus typically operates those cameras, and they're the ones that are manually moving those cameras up and down and trying to find Dragon and keep a focus on it so that we can have these amazing views here today.
And as Dragon, as you mentioned, that waypoint point about 220 meters from the International Space Station, that's very close to, but just outside what's known as the keep-out sphere for the International Space Station. This is the sphere that any visiting vehicle needs to stay outside of until given explicit permission to proceed in closer to the International Space Station. We would expect that go, no-go poll to either come when they're holding at waypoint 1, or if they don't need to hold at waypoint 1, shortly before they're to then proceed into waypoint 2, 20 meters from the station. Again, another point where they could hold if they need to, and we have on past flights seen them hold sometimes at that waypoint 2 20-meter point for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's alignment, sometimes it's been visuals and lighting conditions, with just where the International Space Station is in its orbit. Might seem kind of odd to think that, wait, why would we need to wait if we can dock at night? But shadows are really important, and understanding them and how they interplay with the autonomous navigation systems.
And so we're actually pretty close to that waypoint 0 mark. We're about 403 meters. So Dragon's about 403 meters away from the International Space Station. So just around that waypoint 0 mark that we've been talking about. Now Dragon will continue past that point and into waypoint 1, which is again that 220 meter mark. So it really is just a choreography that it follows throughout its final approach and docking today.
And if you think about the overall trajectory of approach here, you can kind of think of it as like an airplane that's in the air, where you're directly underneath it, but then you can walk in front of it and up to its nose. And that's sort of what Dragon's going to do here, moving from waypoint 0 up to waypoint 1.
So you were mentioning the keep-out sphere. So that's one of those invisible boundaries. There's also the approach ellipsoid, which we mentioned a little bit earlier today, but Dragon's already inside of that approach ellipsoid. So that's outside of the keep-out sphere. And that's that 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer boundary. Basically, it's the neighborhood of the International Space Station. So once a visiting vehicle such as Dragon, makes it into that approach ellipsoid, that's when a lot of those joint and integrated operations begin. And again, to enter into the AE, Dragon or any visiting vehicle has to be what is known, it has to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory, which means the spacecraft would not cross into the AE or the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours. So when they do those go, no-go polls to proceed in that is one of the things that they're looking for, making sure that that the vehicle is safe and can proceed in. And so now we're going inside that next invisible boundary around the space station, which is that keep-out sphere that we've been mentioning.
And if you're just joining us here, some great views that are on your screen as Dragon is approaching the International Space Station, just inside of 400 meters now, passing waypoint 0. On the left-hand side of your screen is a live view from the International Space Station looking down at Dragon. You can kind of see it moving across the white clouds there, about to go over the blue ocean in the middle of the screen there. And then on the right, we did have some images of the International Space Station and some images inside of Dragon as well. But Anna, it never gets old looking at views of spacecraft silhouetted against Earth.
And if we think these views are amazing, I just can't imagine what Crew-10 thinks of these views looking down at Earth from the Dragon spacecraft. So you did mention we were inside of waypoint 0.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Approach 0 has started and trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expect arrival at waypoint 1 at approximately 0347 Zulu.
SpaceX Dragon on the big loop, copy 0347 Zulu for waypoint 1.
And you hear that sequence of calls there confirming that Dragon successfully passed waypoint 0 and the trajectory has aligned where we want it to waypoint 1. So everything going very, very good there. And we're expecting the arrival there at waypoint 1 in just about 25 minutes from now.
So once we get to waypoint 1, Dragon will be about 220 meters away from the International Space Station. So again, this is another checkpoint on the way to the International Space Station. And then that final checkpoint is waypoint 2, which is just 20 meters away. And then from there, we will have that initial contact and capture, what is known as soft capture, before those 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6 deploy to have that hard capture. And then they can begin releasing those umbilicals for data and power, and then began the pressurization activities for the vestibule, which is that area between the station hatch and the Dragon hatch that had been previously exposed to the vacuum of space. They'll conduct some leak checks, and then, of course, welcome the new crew aboard the International Space Station.
And yesterday when we lifted off, we were talking about the precise second that we had to lift off to be in the correct plane to reach the International Space Station today. And liftoff times are very, very choreographed, tightly choreographed to make sure we can do this. But once we get into orbit, it becomes a little bit different, right? And the timings of various burns, the timings of arrivals can all change. And that's basically because you've got Earth's gravity pulling on the spacecraft, you've got the moon, you've got some of the other planets, and the orbits, we do really good at predicting them, but once we see what the spacecraft is actually doing, it helps us refine those timelines a little bit like we saw today. And the timings of those burns changing a little bit, maybe not needing to do some of them if Dragon is doing really well. So it really is interesting how it shifts from super precise to now we've got to see what they're actually doing in space.
Typically, when we have a launch, we have what's known as a targeted docking window. So then, of course, it shifts a little based on those burns, whereas the launch itself is an instantaneous launch window, so it has to go at that exact minute and second. So again, yesterday's launch took place at 7:03 p.m. Eastern, 4:03 p.m. Pacific, and since then, Dragon has had about a 28-hour journey to make its way to the International Space Station. Dragon is now just about 330 meters away from the International Space Station. It's now inside waypoint 0, approaching waypoint 1, which is that 220-meter mark. And then from there, it'll continue on and enter inside what is known as the keep-out sphere, which is that 200-meter boundary around the International Space Station before we have that docking. So it's been a long journey for Crew-10 since launch yesterday, and even before that, because they had all of those preparations leading up to launch, getting suited up, those final medical checks, all of the various processes that they went through prior to that liftoff at 7:03 p.m. Eastern, 4:03 p.m. Pacific. So I'm sure they will be glad to be welcomed on board the International Space Station in really just a few minutes from now.
Yeah, and after that liftoff yesterday, and after the crew initially got onto orbit, there were some things that they needed to do as Dragon, configured itself for the orbital journey up to the International Space Station today. The crew got some time to eat, they got some time to rest and relax as well over the course of the last 28 hours. So it hasn't just been fully in their suits, in their seats. They were able to take those suits off shortly after liftoff. They are, of course, back in those suits now because during the more critical operations of spaceflight, such as launch, docking, undocking, and reentry and splashdown, we do have the crews in those intravehicular activity suits, or IVA suits as we call them.
So you'd mentioned a little bit some of the free time that they've had without those suits. They did have that sleep period. They woke up today around 8 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Central. So they've been up for about 10 hours or so getting ready for today's docking operations, but they did have that time to take a nap and get well rested and ready to be part of the Expedition 72 crew. And also on the International Space Station, not that long ago, the ISS crew was actually asleep right before we came on air. So they finished those post-sleep operations that they go through to start getting ready for today's docking operations. Again, NASA astronaut Nick Hague will be monitoring Dragon's approach.
And SpaceX Dragon on the big loop. Expect reconfiguration of C2V2 return link to support docking video shortly.
SpaceX Dragon, copy.
And that call basically saying that that C2V2, the common communication for visiting vehicle system that allows Dragon to talk to the ISS to talk to the ground, it just sort of creates some nice redundant communication paths for all the vehicles and all the teams involved today. That system was primarily configured for the initial approach of Dragon up to the station through waypoint 0, and we just heard them briefing the crew that they'll be reconfiguring that again for the docking portion.
So we'll continue to hear a lot of those call-outs from the ground teams and the astronauts on the International Space Station, as well as Dragon, as we continue to get into the final stages of docking today. Right now, Dragon is about 310 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing to fly in to make its final approach and docking. So it's getting pretty close now. And there you're continuing to see, if you squint, you can see a view of Dragon there in the center of your screen. So again, these are views captured by cameras on the International Space Station. And so that is the Dragon Endurance spacecraft, and it's actually the fourth flight for that Endurance spacecraft. It previously flew 3 other commercial crew program missions, Crew-3, Crew-5, and Crew-7, and the fourth flight, obviously, today for Crew-10.
That's right. And overall, this is the 10th crew rotation mission for NASA's Commercial Crew Program that Dragon is flying. It's also Dragon's 14th human spaceflight mission to the International Space Station and Dragon's 16th human spaceflight mission overall, since Dragons don't always go to the International Space Station, but we have had 2 free flyer missions in the Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn missions as well. And with today and with the Crew-10 mission, Dragon has carried 60 crew members at this point across its 16 missions.
And so, yeah, Dragon has had 10 rotational missions, so that continues to be part of NASA's Commercial Crew Program. We also have, of course, the Commercial Resupply Services, and we have the Commercial Earth Orbit Development Program working on potential future commercial space stations. So space is really becoming a commercial public-private endeavor. And you see that here as Dragon is docking to the International Space Station, obviously a government platform, but commercial partners bringing crew and cargo and things to the International Space Station. Again, once Crew-10 is on board the International Space Station, they will partake in a multitude of science experiments, technology demonstrations, all for the benefit of humanity. And so as Dragon continues to make its final approach to the International Space Station, now about 370 meters away, let's go ahead and turn it back over to NASA's Gary Jordan at NASA's Mission Control Center in Houston.
Hey, thank you, Anna. We are following along on the action here. Now inside the approach ellipsoid, we are in what is called joint operations. Both teams in each of the flight control rooms here in Houston, as well as where you are, Anna, at the Mission Control Center over in Hawthorne, California, with the SpaceX teams, are operating by the same joint flight rules. They're working through the procedures step by step, doing go, no-go polls along the way to make sure that all teams are ready for the next steps. The teams here in Mission Control Houston are currently polling to make sure that we can pass waypoint 1 and go inside waypoint 2. When we pass waypoint 1, we're going to be inside what is called the keep out sphere. Now, when we cross that boundary, there are a new set of flight rules to abide by and a new set of conditions to make sure that the crew can proceed all the way to docking, currently scheduled again for tonight at 11 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. Pacific. So the station is continuing to prepare for the crew's arrival. As I mentioned before, the station's solar arrays are feathered. We did configure the station itself to be in the docking attitude, and teams here are working through the C2V2 system, the common communication for visiting vehicles, power cycling that and make sure that data is flowing between the 2 spacecraft, the International Space Station and Crew-10 Endurance, and that the Crew-10, when it's on the docking axis right in front of the International Space Station going in towards the forward port, has a perfect view of the docking ring, of the docking port, the International Docking Adapter. And as it closes its way in, has all the data
Dragon is transmitting docking camera video. Please confirm video and data updating in the Dragon docking monitor.
Capcom Tess Caswell here in Mission Control Houston, standing by for confirmation from the crew aboard Endurance. This was the troubleshooting issue I was addressing with the common communications for visiting vehicles, power cycling that system to make sure that they could have that video once they get on the station's docking axis. we wait for crew confirmation. We are getting video from the International Space Station's external cameras.
And Houston Station on the big loop, I can confirm I have good centerline camera. Station looks beautiful.
Houston copies.
Now it's critical that the teams communicate on this big loop to make sure all stakeholders are aware of the progress that's being made. That's cycling to enable Nick Hague, who's aboard the International Space Station. He's got a display in front of him monitoring the docking operations and receiving data from Dragon itself into the International Space Station. This is a safeguard. Dragon's rendezvous and docking to the International Space Station is a fully automated process. However, Hague does have an ability to execute commands if necessary, but really only there for monitoring. So that C2V2 power cycling allows him to have the view from Dragon itself as it moves up towards the docking axis, which you're seeing now on your screen from the external cameras aboard the International Space Station. Hague monitoring Dragon's arrival, receiving data including range and range rate, making sure that Dragon is moving at the expected velocity, speed, position. Everything's positioned on board the International Space Station for docking. Again, the station itself at the docking attitude. Now again, the station teams here in the International Space Station flight control room polling to make sure that Dragon itself can proceed past waypoint 1 towards waypoint 2. Waypoint 2 being just 20 meters in front of the International Space Station's docking port. This will be inside the keep-out sphere. It is Nick Hague monitoring the operations from the International Space Station. Now, once it makes its way in to dock with the space station, it'll be NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore that is tasked with the responsibility of opening up the hatches and preparing the station to welcome the crew aboard Endurance. This includes opening up several hatches, including the Node 2 hatch and the APAS hatch, both of which are closed for the docking operations and cannot be opened until the docking is complete. He'll start venting air to make sure that the air is circulating properly through the pressurized mating adapter, and there's no pockets of carbon dioxide, just a safety procedure. When he's going to inspect the hatch, he'll be wearing goggles and gloves for safety measures. We'll cover all of that post-docking, but that'll be Butch Wilmore's responsibility. We'll also be getting camera views from inside the station. These were set up by NASA astronaut Don Pettit. The crew waking up and making sure on an early day aboard the International Space Station, much earlier than their typical day. In fact, their crew wake period was just after midnight Greenwich Mean Time, which is the time that they operate aboard the International Space Station. They were up and making sure that everything was prepared for Crew-10's arrival today. We're making our way up the docking axis, beautiful views as Endurance makes its way above the horizon of the Earth. Again, it's making its way towards the docking axis. This is immediately in front of the International Space Station. The camera views from Dragon itself illuminating the solar arrays. You can see the original solar arrays of the International Space Station, as well as the IROSAs, the rollout solar arrays that are augmenting some of the station's power. This as part of a process to continue the science done aboard the International Space Station, which is, of course, the mission of the astronauts and cosmonaut aboard Crew-10. Crew-10 really just a transport mission to get to the International Space Station. Once there, they join Expedition 72 for at least a time. Don Pettit, NASA astronaut Don Pettit, will be returning aboard a Soyuz. Once that Soyuz undocks, crew on board the International Space Station officially begins Expedition 73, continuing the great science and technology demonstrations that are necessary in low Earth orbit to prepare for future human missions to deep space, including the Moon and to Mars. Camera views from inside Dragon Endurance showing displays that show some of the trajectory that is necessary to converge with the docking axis. This is waypoint 1. Now when you see those displays, you'll see the trajectory curve out, the spacecraft itself calculating breakout maneuvers that are necessary as it makes its way along the planned set of procedures and approach maneuvers. Waypoint 1, immediately in front of the docking axis, once that is executed, the Dragon will fire its Draco thrusters to maneuver inside. Inside 6 minutes from the planned arrival of waypoint 1, continuing to get these fantastic views provided from the International Space Station as well as from inside Dragon itself. Commander Anne McLean as well as pilot Nicole Ayers, you see positioned as the camera in between them shows them in their launch and entry suits. We did hear before that they are allowed to bring up their visors through these set of procedures. Those suits are donned prior to joint operations, and they'll close their visors as part of the next dynamic phase, which will be the docking, which just as an added safety measure. Endurance less than 300 meters from the International Space Station, being illuminated by an orbital sunset right now. The views you see of Earth and of Dragon will start to get a little darker as we enter into an orbital sunset and orbital nighttime. Dragon, now brightened by the sun, will start to dim, and you'll start to see the docking lights as well as the navigation lights. Docking light will be white at the center of the spacecraft, and you'll see green and red lights on the forward bulkhead, green indicating the starboard position, red indicating the port position. The International Space Station cameras sometimes view from an upside down position, as you can see from this view, as the Earth is on the top left of your screen. So the port and starboard navigation light positions will be reversed, but it's because the camera is sort of upside down from the position of Earth. Additionally, the cameras on board the International Space Station are subject to the radiation environment of the station. Now, the station itself does receive a certain amount of radiation, but also a certain amount of protection from the Earth's atmosphere. As we are in low Earth orbit, 250 miles from the Earth is not terribly far. There's still a decent amount of protection, but there is a higher radiation environment. When we enter into an orbital nighttime, some of the cameras, you'll start to see some pixels, different colors on the camera. As we enter into an orbital nighttime, those pixels and different colors become a little bit more apparent. Those are from the radiation environment, the radiation damaging the pixels inside the cameras themselves. inside 3 minutes from waypoint 1 arrival. We do have a go to proceed past waypoint 1. So Dragon, what you'll see is not a pause at waypoint 1, but it should proceed towards the keep out sphere. You'll notice some of the views change throughout our coverage here. Feeds coming from Dragon, you can see illuminating the International Space Station. Those feeds provided by ground
SpaceX
stations.
On the big loop, approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue its approach to waypoint 2.
Dragon, copy all.
That relayed from the SpaceX core in Hawthorne, California, confirmed by the crew aboard Endurance. We are proceeding inside the keep out sphere. You are seeing the docking light begin to blink at the center of Dragon Endurance. Features of Dragon becoming a little bit more apparent. The nose cone fully open, exposing the docking ring and the forward bulk of the Dracos. You did hear that Dragon will extend the soft docking ring mechanism. This allows for a cushioned contact as Dragon makes its way toward the International Docking Adapter. Docking comes in several phases, which includes contact and a soft capture, which is initiated by the docking ring. That docking ring is retracted to pull Dragon in closer to the International Space Station, and then begin a sequence to hard dock Dragon to the International Space Station. There are 12 hooks that are driven to really latch Dragon to the International Space Station. They're deployed in 2 sets of 6, and those will be confirmed by the crew. Once all of the hooks are driven, there is also an umbilical that extends and connects to an interface on the International Space Station side to provide power and data transfer between the 2 vehicles. Dragon right now operating on battery power and solar power that's generated from the trunk. Once Dragon attaches to the International Space Station, it'll be receiving power from the International Space Station through the duration of its stay aboard. We did hear confirmation that Dragon is passing waypoint 1. We're now moving inside the docking axis and towards the keep out sphere. Passing waypoint 1, Dragon Endurance heading towards the International Space Station. We're following along from here inside Mission Control Houston, working jointly with the teams in Hawthorne, California, to take us through the next series of steps, including crossing the keep out sphere and heading towards waypoint 2. Let's send it back over to Anna and Chris in Hawthorne.
And thanks, Gary. Yeah, so we have passed waypoint 1, so waypoint 2 is what is up next, and that will put Dragon only about 20 meters.
Station Houston on the big loop. Monitor approach per step 3 of 1.102, Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. Let us know when your review is complete and you are ready for docking.
You heard that.
Station copies on the big loop step 3, and I can confirm that review is complete and we're ready for docking.
So that call there between the ISS flight control room and the crew on board the International Space Station.
Houston copies. At waypoint 2, Dragon will hold for approximately 5 minutes.
And you heard that call there indicating that the ISS...
Thanks for the heads up.
and the crew there are now ready for Dragon's docking to the forward docking adapter of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. Dragon approaching waypoint 2, which is the point about 20 meters from the International Space Station's forward docking adapter. And as we did just hear there, we are expecting Dragon to hold for about 5 minutes once it reaches that point. It crossed through waypoint 1 and waypoint 0 without having to hold. But again, these waypoints or checkpoints are places we can hold if we need to, and if we don't, we can proceed forward through them.
And so we have gone through 2 of those waypoints, so waypoint 0 and 1, and so now Dragon is less than 200 meters away from the International Space Station, about 170 meters currently away from its target of that node 2 forward docking port. And there you're seeing a great view on your screen of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft as it makes its final approach to the International Space Station. The teams in Mission Control Houston and the teams at the International Space, or not the International Space Station, the SpaceX Mission Control teams behind us are, of course, doing some final go, no-go polls for docking. It's one of the final checkpoints between those teams to make sure everyone is good to proceed and to dock. We did hear that there will likely be a brief hold at waypoint 2. And again, that waypoint 2 is just 20 meters away from the International Space Station, so very close at that point. So they will hold briefly, and then from there, we will have our final approach and docking. We will have an initial soft capture. We did hear that the soft capture ring was being extended a few minutes ago. And then from there, they will begin to deploy those hooks, 2 sets of 6 for a total of 12 hooks to get that hard capture. And during that final hold, that again, we're expecting around the waypoint 2 mark, which is 20 meters away from the space station. During that final hold, they can possibly wait for better lighting conditions. So the space station does have exterior lights and Dragon can dock in the dark. But of course, we go through an orbit every 90 minutes. So there's a sunrise and sunset every 45 minutes. So if they need to wait for a little bit of improvement in the lighting conditions, they can use that waypoint 2 hold opportunity to wait for things like that, ensure final alignment, ensure everyone is good to go for that final approach and docking.
And as we could see right there, right before we switch to the inside view there, that's a great view on the outside. You can see that we're passing into an orbital sunset here, so approaching orbital night. And you can see how that lighting is very different on board the International Space Station. But what I love about that view, too, is you can see the forward navigation strobe light from Dragon illuminating the forward element of the International Space Station where it will be docking just a few minutes from now. But of course, approaching waypoint 20. This is a view now from the International Space Station looking at Dragon. You can see the white navigation light indicating the center of the docking alignment axis there. And the green light that you see is the starboard navigation light. So just helping the folks on the International Space Station keep track of Dragon's orientation there. And the red one that just came into view is for the port side orientation. And I really love this too as we get into orbital night as we're approaching the space station, because we're probably going to see Dragon's Draco thrusters pulsing, and that's always a sight to behold in orbital night.
And so Dragon and the International Space Station.
Soft capture ring extension complete.
And we just heard confirmation that that soft capture ring extension has been fully completed. So that extension of the soft capture ring, it's fully out and ready for that soft capture, that initial contact with the International Space Station. So right now, the International Space Station and Dragon are currently flying over Canada. And they're continuing to make its final approach to the International Space Station, currently just over 100 meters away as it makes its way to that waypoint 2, which is 20 meters away. So a little over 80 meters to go to the international, or to that waypoint 2. And then that final initial capture, and then we'll have the hooks deploy and have that hard capture milestone.
Now, as you're looking there at the SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne, California, where we are, Dragon up on orbit as it is approaching waypoint 2 on that docking axis for the forward docking adapter. It's approaching the space station very, very slowly, about a few tenths of a meter per second. And it's also trying to keep in proper alignment with that docking port. But again, waypoint 2 is where we're going to stop based on the calls, and we can do some final alignments there and final checkouts. But so far so good for Dragon. About 28 hours after liftoff now, after lifting off from the Kennedy Space Center yesterday afternoon at 7:03 p.m., completing the docking in just a few minutes from now.
And so Dragon is now less than 100 meters away from the International Space Station as it continues to make that final approach. And so right now we're seeing those live views of the SpaceX Mission Control team here in Hawthorne, California. And typically we'll go back to these views when we do have those brief loss of signal between the International Space Station and Dragon and the ground. And we'll regain those views shortly. It's just a handover between satellites. So that tracking and data relay satellite system that the International Space Station relies on, they have a brief handover period between satellites, which causes a loss of those views periodically throughout our coverage.
Kind of like going from cell phone tower to cell phone tower.
And so let's see, Dragon is less than 80 meters away, so continuing to approach waypoint 2, about 60 meters to go until it reaches waypoint 2. Again, we are expecting Dragon to hold at waypoint 2 for just a few minutes to ensure final alignment, to ensure lighting conditions are good before we have that final docking. We are expecting that docking to take place around 9 a.m. Pacific, a little bit later than that. And right before that final docking takes place, we will hear that call for CHOP that we mentioned previously, which is the crew hands-off point. So right after you hear that call is typically when that soft capture takes place.
And that CHOP call that we've been talking about, and basically what that means is the crew can no longer manually abort Dragon away from the International Space Station if there should be a reason to do so. It would all be based on Dragon's automation at that point. Everything going very well for Dragon as it continues to approach the space station. The crew monitoring the automated approach for the vehicle, as well as any escape options they might have to do, but again, not expecting to have to use those.
Station Houston, on the big loop, the no exercise constraint for docking begins now.
Station copies.
And so you did just hear a call up from the Capcom or capsule communicator at Mission Control in Houston to the crew on the International Space Station, mentioning that the exercise constraint has started. So typically when we have visiting vehicles such as Dragon arriving and departing the International Space Station, there are constraints on crew exercise, and that's basically to prevent additional loads from being imparted on the station during these dynamic operations.
And I love this sort of night vision-esque view here from Dragon looking at the International Space Station. So this is a view from the Dragon Endurance carrying the Crew-10 crew. The forward docking port there is in the center of your screen, sort of being illuminated every few seconds by that light from Dragon. And what I love about this is you can see the Crew-9 Dragon directly above that docking port. And of course, Crew-9 going to be coming home after a brief handover period with the Crew-10 crew. And then inside of Dragon Endurance here, you have Commander Anne McLean on the left-hand side of your screen, pilot Nicole Ayers on the right. Next to Nicole is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, and on Anne's left is JAXA, or Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi. Anne and Takuya are returning to the International Space Station for their second long-duration missions, and Nicole and Kirill are on their first missions to space.
So it's getting pretty real for the 4 crew members that make up Crew-10. Right now, they are just under 25 meters away from the International Space Station, so just outside of that waypoint 2, which is that point at which Dragon will hold for a few minutes.
Big loop. You see we're approaching waypoint 2. Crew visors are closed.
Copy. Crew-10 visors are closed.
We did just hear that confirmation that the crew is approaching waypoint 2, so they see that on those screens in front of them. They see the distance, and they're able to monitor that approach as well.
And this is great because you can see Dragon's Draco thrusters firing here. You've got the red and the green navigation lights as well as the white one, but all those little flashes and pulses that you're seeing around the vehicle are the thrusters, keeping that alignment as we continue to approach waypoint 2, 20 meters from the ISS, where again, we are expecting to hold for a few minutes up. And you can see we're really getting close considering now we're really illuminating that forward docking port with Dragon.
And so Dragon is actually at that waypoint 2 mark now, just around 20 meters away. So we will have that hold briefly. And recently, the team in Mission Control Houston did conduct their final go, no-go pull as well for docking.
SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon is holding at waypoint 2 for Dragon Eye assessment.
You hear that confirmation.
Dragon, copy.
And you hear that confirmation that Dragon is holding. Now you're on the left-hand side of your screen as you're looking from the ISS's camera out at Dragon. Even though we've said Dragon is holding, you're still going to see some of those thruster pulses because holding in space is not like just stopping your car that holds the same position.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Ground is bold go, and we'll be enabling approach shortly. Confirm crew readiness for final approach.
SpaceX Dragon, Crew-10 is ready for final approach.
And that is great words there to hear from SpaceX Mission Control.
Resume has been commanded. Reminder, once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Copy.
And Anna, here we go.
So we did just hear that they have the go to resume final approach, so that we had that brief hold completed at waypoint 2, which was just 20 meters away from the International Space Station. So Dragon will now resume its final approach and finish its fly into the International Space Station's Node 2 forward docking port.
And we heard
Dragon is in approach 2.
Your good confirmation of Dragon in that approach 2 mode, meaning it has passed waypoint 2 and is coming into the station. Again, you can see
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 in 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copy.
and that was the call from the International Space Station Flight Control Room to the crew on the ISS. Again, just everyone confirming, making sure everyone's on the same page, as Dragon is now very close to docking with the International Space Station here today.
And so Dragon is now just 17 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing to close in on its target. Coming up here shortly, we will likely hear that call out for CHOP, which stands for Crew Hands Off Point. That typically takes place less than 30 seconds before docking. So as soon as you hear that, you know that that docking will take place very soon after. And then at that point, when we hear the CHOP call out, any aborts will have to be done automatically by Dragon. And so also on the International Space Station, we have NASA astronaut Nick Hague monitoring this final approach. And then once Dragon is docked, NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore will walk through those hatch preparation and opening steps to welcome the crew on board. And Dragon is now less than 14 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing that final approach.
These very delicate series of maneuvers now. Dragon approaching very, very slowly relative to the International Space Station. Again, we talked earlier that launch is all about accelerating the vehicles to orbital velocity, and even though both Dragon and the ISS are traveling at about 17,500 miles per hour or 27,500 kilometers per hour, they are moving very, very slow, like 1/10 of a meter per second in relation to each other right now.
Dragon now at about 10 meters away from the International Space Station. We're standing by for that call out for CHOP here shortly.
SpaceX Dragon, 10 meters.
Copy, 10.
And again, you're looking at the forward docking port of the International Space Station, which is mounted to the Harmony or Node 2 module of the space station. The Crew-9 Dragon, which has been there since September, is also attached to a docking port on this module, and that Dragon is actually just off the top of your screen there as Crew-10's Dragon comes in for docking in just a few moments. And I love these views again. You've got the Dragon, you've got the ISS staring at Dragon on the left-hand side of your screen, and you've got Dragon looking at its docking port on the ISS on the right.
And Dragon is now less than 7 meters away from the International Space Station as it continues to make that final approach. Traveling with a range rate of less than 0.082, which, as you mentioned earlier, it continues to get slower and slower as we make this final approach.
5 meters.
Copy, 5 meters.
So the next call we should hear is chop, or that crew hands-off period, followed moments later by docking.
That typically comes at about 2 meters away from the International Space Station. Right now, we're less than 4 meters away. Less than 3 meters away.
2 meters, please hands off.
Copy, hands off.
There is the chop call.
Standing by for initial contact of Dragon to the International Space Station.
Dragon contact and soft capture complete.
And there you heard Dragon has successfully docked to the International Space Station. We have contact and soft capture confirmed. Soft capture meaning that the initial soft capture ring around Dragon has physically connected with the International Docking Adapter. And this is just the first part of the overall docking sequence, Anna.
And so we did have that contact confirmed at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 11:04 p.m. Central, while both Dragon and the International Space Station were flying 260 stat sheet miles.
Capture ring retraction in progress.
Flying 260 stat sheet miles over the Atlantic Ocean, and we did just hear confirmation that that soft capture ring is now beginning to retract. So they're beginning those steps to firmly attach Dragon to the International Space Station so that we can have what is known as a hard capture.
And again, as we mentioned earlier, like all the timings of these events are a little nebulous and they can change around by a couple of minutes here. So while we were expecting completion of we're expecting the completion of soft capture ring retraction, which we heard was already underway in just a few minutes. That will be followed by the start of the hard capture sequence, which is a series of 12 hooks that are separated into 2 batches of 6 that drive between Dragon and the International Space Station to really hard connect them together. And then after we have that, we have a whole bunch of other things that sort of come into place at that point once Dragon is securely on the Harmony module of the ISS. Once those soft capture systems retract, the spacecraft will we're getting closer for the hard capture. And then and that's about a 15-minute process.
And so once those hooks are fully driven, so those 2 sets of 6 hooks for a total of 12, then we will see those umbilicals deploy. And again, that helps to hardline the data and power from the International Space Station to Dragon. And then the crew on the International Space Station, as well as Dragon, will get ready for the hatch opening operation. So they will have to pressurize the vestibule. Again, that is that space between the Dragon hatch and the Space Station hatch that was previously exposed to the vacuum of space prior to this docking. Again, we had that docking initial capture at 9:04 p.m. Pacific. So they will work to pressurize that space, perform a series of leak checks, and then once everything is good and they get the go-ahead, they will open those hatches. Again, there's the hatch on Dragon that has to be open, as well as the station hatch, to then bring the Crew-10 onto the International Space Station. And there you're actually getting a live view from the International Space Station looking at the station hatch that will have to be opened before you can get to the Dragon hatch and bring the crew on board. And they will be welcomed by the Expedition 72 crew. And they will have a brief welcoming ceremony, and then they will go into a safety briefing and get up to speed and adjust to life on station. Again, completing that handover period with the Crew-9 crew before Crew-9 returns home.
And then they get to work, because as exciting as the last 28 hours have been from launch until docking, this is just the beginning of a multi-month mission for Crew-10. They're joining the Expedition 72 crew, which has been ongoing for the last few months aboard the International Space Station. And about a month from now, when a Soyuz crew rotation from Russia completes, that will actually mark the start of Expedition 73, which our Crew-10 crew will be joining. And of course, there are about 200 science experiments that the crew will be performing over the course of their multi-month mission up there. And I can't wait to see it and everything that they're going to be able to do up there.
So they will be contributing to about 200 different experiments and technology demonstrations from human research. They're doing some flammability studies.
Ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
And we did just hear confirmation that the soft capture ring has been fully retracted. So again, that soft capture that happened with the initial contact about 4 minutes ago at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 11:04 p.m. Central, as the International Space Station and Dragon were flying over the Atlantic Ocean. They are going to hold that docking's hard capture sequence a little bit to make some final configurations. We do expect that full hard capture process to take about 15 minutes, so we have about 10 or so more minutes to go there. The next step in that process will be to begin to deploy those hooks. Again, there are 12 total hooks that have to fully engage and really bring Dragon in for a nice hard seal to the International Space Station's forward docking port.
And sort of like a lot of things with spaceflight, docking is not just a singular instantaneous event when the two vehicles actually meet and connect with one another. There's the soft capture, which we're through with Dragon right now. There's also, like the vehicles are moving in relation to one another at docking, so they've also got to make sure that any motion between them is dampened out and that they are really ready for that hard capture connection.
And there you're seeing a live view on your screen on the right-hand side. That's a view from the International Space Station of the Dragon spacecraft Endurance, now docked to the International Space Station's Node 2 forward docking port. And again, that docking took place at 9:04 p.m. following an approximately 28-hour journey.
Station Houston, on the big loop, MCS configured, proceeding with hook driving.
Station copies.
And there we hear good confirmation that what we were waiting for there and holding the docking sequence has been, we've gotten through that, and now we are going to begin that hard capture sequence, and that's what you were talking about, Anna, driving the series of 12 hooks, 6 at a time, to form that hard capture. And again, we expect that process to take about 15 minutes, but it really is great to see the Dragon Endurance back on the space station. Its 4th trip to space. This particular capsule has launched the Crew-3, Crew-5, and Crew-7 missions, and of course returned those astronauts safely to Earth. And now it's doing it again for the 4th time for the Crew-10.
And it's the 10th total rotational mission for SpaceX flying crew to the International Space Station. Again, we did hear confirmation that the first set of 6 hooks for a total of 12 is now driving. So those will make a hard capture, and then they will drive the second set of 6 hooks. And then from there, we will have confirmation of that hard capture, and then they will deploy some umbilicals and then begin that pressurization and leak check series before we have hatch opening and welcoming Crew-10 on board the International Space Station. Of course, it's been a pretty long journey for Crew-10. They've been traveling for over 28 hours now, following a liftoff yesterday of 7:03 p.m. Eastern, 4:03 p.m. Pacific from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Launch Complex 39A. They had approximately 9-minute ride to orbit before we had that orbital insertion and second engine cutoff, and then they've been traveling in free flight since then. They had a series of burns that set them up for a docking today at 9:04 p.m. Pacific. They first had their phase burn, and that was completed yesterday at 4:52 p.m. Pacific, followed by a boost burn at 12:08 p.m. Pacific, a close burn a little bit after that at 12:50 p.m. And then they had a mid-course out-of-plane burn, a transfer burn, co-elliptic burn, and just recently we had that approach initiation burn. So a lot of burns to set them up and get them on a track to where they are now at the International Space Station.
And after that sequence of burns, it went pretty good after that point. We saw Dragon cruise through the waypoint 1 and waypoint 0 targets of 400 and 220 meters, respectively, from the International Space Station, and then close into that waypoint 2 were a brief hold, and then right on in for a picture-perfect docking over the North Atlantic.
And so we did have that soft capture at 9:04. Now the first set of 6 hooks has fully closed, and now the second set of 6 hooks is driving. Once that second and final set of hooks finishes closing and driving, we will have that hard capture complete. And then from there, they will, of course, begin the pressurization process of the vestibule.
And of course, part of Crew-10's arrival at the space station means that it's time for another crew who's been up there for a few months to come on home. So a few days after Crew-10, now that Crew-10 has docked, in a few days we will have the planned undocking and return of Crew-9, which includes NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Butch Wilmore, and Sunita Williams, as well as Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. 2 of them have been up there since September. Nick and Alexander launched on Crew-9 in September on the Crew-9 mission from Slick 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And of course, Butch and Sunny were already on the space station and joined Crew-9 and will now be coming home on Dragon.
So they will do that brief handover period. The handover period between crews is pretty typical. We like to ensure a continuous presence of U.S. crew, and then the Crew-9 will help bring Crew-10 up to speed as the new arrivals and get them adjusted to space station life before they return home. And so that second set of 6 hooks continues to drive. We had that initial docking about 10 minutes ago at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, and typically it takes about 15 minutes to have hard capture complete, so we should be approaching that milestone here shortly.
And as all of that is happening and those umbilicals are being connected,
hard capture complete.
And there we heard confirmation that we do have hard capture, so all 12 hooks have finished driving. And then from there, the umbilicals will start to deploy, and that again brings that hardline data and power from the International Space Station to Dragon. And then the pressurization of the vestibule will begin. And again, NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore on the International Space Station side is on tap to be to help with those hatch opening operations today. Again, we are expecting hatch opening about an hour and a half or so after or from now, and then from there will be a welcoming combined with the farewell remarks of Crew-10 since that handover is pretty short. And then from there they will adjust to station life. There will be a safety briefing, and then they'll get right into it as Expedition 72 members for the next month before they become Expedition 73.
And and you can see that's Sunny Williams there in front of the hatch on the International Space Station side. So we did hear confirmation of hard capture is complete. The docking sequence still proceeding, though, with Dragon. You mentioned those umbilicals that are now being driven between the vehicles to establish good power and data connections between the International Space Station and Dragon. Now, we've talked a little bit about what the folks on the ISS side are doing here, getting those hatches ready. And inside Dragon, they're continuing to monitor the docking sequence as it progresses, and then they'll also be able to get out of their suits as well that they have been in for the last couple of hours as Dragon has approached the International Space Station.
So as Dragon crew gets out of their suits, of course, as we mentioned previously, NASA's astronaut Butch Wilmore is going to start those hatch opening operations. And there on your screen, you are seeing NASA astronaut Nick Hague as well as Roscosmos cosmonaut Ovchinin as they stand by to greet Crew-10 members and welcome them as part of the International Space Station crew. Again, they are going to get that pressurization process underway here shortly, and they will pressurize that area known as the vestibule, which is the area between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch that was previously exposed to the vacuum of space. And then once that happens, they will conduct a series of leak checks. And there on your screen, you just saw NASA astronaut Sunny Williams actually floating right in front of that hatch that will be open in just a little bit.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. Docking sequence complete. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connections shortly. You are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012. Crew-10, welcome aboard the International Space Station.
SpaceX Houston and ISS, this is Dragon Mission Specialist Takuya Onishi on the big loop. We copy the docking sequence is complete. We are go for 4.012 for docking suits. And on behalf of the entire crew, I would like to thank all the partners, especially our SpaceX friends who trained us and enabled us to safely arrive at the International Space Station. It was so amazing to see the ISS shining in the darkness of space and symbolizing human beings, technology, and international cooperation. And it's such a great honor for us to be part of this program. We have a lot of exciting work ahead of us that we are looking forward to. Again, thank you very much to everybody who helps us to get here.
And there you just heard some really nice words between Crew-10 as they have now arrived at the International Space Station. We do have that confirmation of hard capture complete. Again, those words were coming from JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi, who is serving as one of the mission specialists for Crew-10. And so now with Dragon successfully and safely docked.
And Houston copies all. Welcome to the International Space Station, Crew-10. We look forward to your work and the spirit of cooperation with which you've arrived.
Thank you very much, Des.
And there's some words from the capsule communicator, Capcom, in Houston, in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Back to Crew-10, and again, now with Dragon docked, that's going to wrap us up for our coverage here in Hawthorne, but our coverage for Crew-10 won't stop there.
That's correct. It's great to see the Dragon Endurance docked back at the station and see Crew-10 ready to begin their multi-month mission in there. In a minute, we're going to toss it back to Gary in Mission Control Houston to take us through the vestibule depressurization hatch opening, and then we'll see NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, along with JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov float into the International Space Station. But first, let's do a quick recap of how we got here. The crew suited up yesterday before their launch and then had their ride to the pads in those sleek-looking Teslas before ingressing an even sleeker-looking Dragon. They lifted off right on time from the Kennedy Space Center at pad 39A at 7:03 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, March 14th. Stage 1 successfully returned to a landing at Landing Zone 1 for recovery and reuse a few minutes later. Dragon separated from the second stage of Falcon 9, and once it was safely in orbit, deployed its nose cone to reveal that docking adapter and all the navigation aids needed to get to the International Space Station. Dragon also completed 5 major burns on its journey to the International Space Station, coming in for a docking at 9:04 p.m. Pacific Time, 11:04 p.m. Central Time today, March 15th, 2025. And it was Dragon's 10th crew rotation mission for NASA and the Commercial Crew Program.
That's right. And now that Crew-10 has arrived to the International Space Station, we are looking ahead to the return of Crew-9, and we will be taking you along as they return home after their long duration stay on board the International Space Station. Teams will be assessing return dates, which will then be announced on nasa.gov, so be sure to tune in as NASA and SpaceX will then bring you live coverage every step of their return home. And you can also follow SpaceX and NASA on social media for real-time updates. But thank you again for watching our coverage of docking, and go NASA, go SpaceX, and go to Crew-10 and Crew-9. For those of you watching on X, please head over to NASA Plus to follow the coverage of hatch opening and welcoming live.
So thanks everyone for joining us here in Hawthorne. Thank you specifically to Anna for joining us from Johnson Space Center. And
And thank you, everyone, again for tuning in. We'll now go ahead and pass it over to NASA's Gary Jordan at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, who will continue sharing the mission of hatch opening and welcoming as the crew prepares to board their home for the next few months, the International Space Station. Thank you so much.
Talk, SpaceX on the big loop. We've got you loud and clear for the cabin mic comm check.
Okay, we have you loud and clear.
This is Mission Control Houston. You're looking at a live view of the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Thanks to Anna and Chris over in SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. We just wrapped up our joint coverage of Crew-10's arrival to the International Space Station, docking at 11:04 p.m. Central Time, 9:04 p.m. Pacific. The International Space Station and Dragon were flying 260 statute miles over the Atlantic Ocean at the time of docking. Now that the docking sequence is complete, which means the ring is fully retracted, hooks are driven, and the umbilical is extended to draw power from the International Space Station and transfer data, crew inside Dragon is getting prepared for the next set of procedures to configure Dragon in such a way for its extended stay aboard the International Space Station, while the crew aboard the International Space Station prepares for opening up the hatches on the other side. Now, the hatch opening sequence is quite extensive. We're expecting the Dragon hatch to be opened a little less than an hour and a half from now. The projected time is 12:45 a.m. Central Time on March 16th. However, this is a variable time. It is the expected time that the Dragon hatch will open. Shortly after, we are planning a welcome ceremony as well as a farewell ceremony, given a shorter duration handover period for the crew aboard the International Space Station before Crew-9 undocks. We will say hello to the Crew-10 astronauts and cosmonaut aboard the International Space Station, welcomed by Expedition 72, while Crew-9 says farewell ahead of their next few days of getting their SpaceX Dragon spacecraft configured for undock and return to splash down off the coast of Florida. Right now you're looking at Dragon Endurance docked to the forward port of the International Space Station. Crew-9 Dragon docked to the zenith port. These views provided by an external camera on the exposed facility outside of the Japanese module. Right now we are in an orbital sunrise, so we are seeing Dragon being illuminated by the sun as we cross the terminator line. We're just west off the coast of South Africa now, 267 statute miles right above that coast, in fact, on a southeast trajectory, heading into an orbital daytime, starting to see the horizon of Earth being illuminated by this view. We're again following the procedures inside the International Space Station. We've been hearing the voice of NASA astronaut Nick Hague, whose responsibility for the past few hours has been the monitoring task of Crew-10's arrival to the International Space Station, receiving data via a common communications for visiting vehicles link between the International Space Station and Dragon, providing telemetry and allowing Hague to monitor Dragon's safe approach docking again at 11:04 p.m. Central Time. Now that Dragon is docked and the crew is getting ready to open the hatch on the International Space Station side, it's Butch Wilmore who is tasked with the responsibility of opening up the hatches. In fact, he's in the Node 2 module right now. The Node 2 forward hatch is open. Throughout our coverage today, it will take some time to open up those hatches. It's quite a lengthy procedure that needs to be done carefully, and we will be continuing to orbit the Earth, handing over between our coverage of TDRS satellites that are providing video from the International Space Station. We're now in a short handover period and expecting to regain those views very shortly. But for now, you're seeing the International Space Station flight control teams here in Houston, Texas. It's Allison Bollinger, that is the flight director for today.
Dragon on Dragon to ground.
On Dragon to ground.
You're coming a little broken. Wondering if you're going.
And Houston on 2, you copy my last?
Negative, Butch. We got you in a handover.
The urine hose for the procedure.
Negative, Butch. Okay, sorry. Stabilization valve APAS was open at 0426, closing at 042730.
You beat us to it. We were going to give you that call when you were drying your suits, but in section 5 of 4.400, we're going to have you guys waive every step but the last one. How copy?
If your last call cut out, say again for urine hose.
And repeating my last, but for that call in section 5 of 4.400, we are not going to have you perform any steps except for the last one. How copy?
Dragon, your call keeps cutting out after about a sentence.
Trying again shorter, do not perform section 5. How copy?
Dragon on Dragon to ground.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, with Dragon to ground being in and out, we can report here that there's no need to perform section 5 of 4.400. How copy?
Dragon, copy on the big loop. We can skip section 5 of 4.400.
That's a good readback.
This is Mission Control Houston following along through the procedures. Crew-10 working through the steps inside Dragon Endurance, a view from which you are seeing the outside of the spacecraft from a camera mounted on the exposed facility of the Japanese module. Inside, the crew are working through steps. They wore their SpaceX launch and entry suits through the duration of today's procedure, docking to the International Space Station as a safety precaution, closing those visors and having the suits as an extra layer of protection. Now that we are docked and hard docked to the International Space Station, that docking sequence complete, the crew may doff or take off their suits and start configuring the cabin of Dragon for opening up the hatch. You'll hear some of those communications through Dragon to ground, those communications intended for the Dragon crew. Some of the communications you'll hear on the big loop and the space to ground loops, because there are crews on both sides of that hatch working to welcome the crew aboard. Each has their own respective role. Again, while the Endurance crew works to doff their suits and configure the Dragon cabin, International Space Station flight engineers working to open up the hatches and welcome the crew aboard. Confirm that the Node 2 forward hatch is already opened inside of Node 2. Next will be the APAS hatch. The APAS hatch is the last hatch on the International Space Station side. There is a vestibule that separates that hatch from the Dragon hatch, and that vestibule right now is at vacuum. Part of the procedures that the crew will undergo, namely NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, will be to turn a valve and introduce air into that vestibule, bringing it up to pressure. Pressure inside the International Space Station and Dragon is that of sea level, 14.7 psi. The procedure to take that vestibule up to vacuum is slow and steady. They make sure that there are no leaks at about 5 pounds per square inch, settling there, making sure that there are no leaks present before bringing it fully up to pressure at 14.7 psi.
ISS power connection established.
Part of the docking sequence is to extend an umbilical from Dragon to the International Space Station. That provides power and communication drawn from the station to Dragon, so Dragon no longer has to rely on battery power. And the solar arrays that you can see, the black paneled section at the trunk from this view, that call was confirming that power is successfully being drawn from the International Space Station into Dragon. Dragon no longer needing to rely on battery power. This is Mission Control Houston, still getting views, though they will be interrupted. You see here from aboard the International Space Station, we're anticipating some very short handovers in communication and views from the International Space Station. It's the teams here you see in Mission Control Houston that are walking through the operations and working with the teams aboard the International Space Station, as well as the flight control teams in Hawthorne, California, and the crew aboard Crew-10 to prepare for the crew's arrival. It'll be this team that witnesses the welcome of Crew-10 aboard the International Space Station when hatches open and the crew floats aboard. Right now we're expecting hatches to open at approximately 12:45 a.m. Central Time. This is an estimated time based on the docking time from this evening. Again, that was 11:04 p.m. So based on the procedures that the team has ahead of them, this is the estimated hatch opening time. We will remain on air and continue our coverage of the hatch opening procedures and welcome ceremony aboard the International Space Station. As a reminder, when we do the welcome ceremony, it will be a unique event in that it will be both a welcome for Crew-10 and the 4 astronauts and cosmonaut aboard, and a farewell to Crew-9. This is due to a shortened period between the arriving spacecraft and the departing spacecraft, and the series of procedures that the astronauts need to undergo to prepare for departure.
And Houston, I'm showing 15 minutes.
Butch, we copy. We are still assessing.
Standing by.
Tess Caswell is the Capcom here in the room today. In the blue blazer, Allison Bollinger. Caswell will be the voice from Mission Control Houston, relaying namely to the crew aboard the International Space Station. Through these hatch opening procedures, it's Caswell's responsibility to communicate with the crew inside station. This includes NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, tasked with the hatch opening procedures, as well as Nick Hague, who is in the monitoring role during Crew-10's arrival and docking, or approach and docking to the International Space Station. It'll be the voice of the SpaceX core, who we will continue to pull into our broadcast. That'll be communicating with the Crew-10 astronauts and cosmonaut aboard Endurance, walking them through their procedures. We already heard them talking specifics about procedures needed for suit doffing. This means taking off their launch and entry suits that are necessary for the critical phase that is contact and capture of Dragon to the International Space Station. Once they go through that dynamic phase, they are taking off their suits and putting on something a little bit more comfortable. They will not be in their SpaceX launch and entry suits when they enter the hatch and are welcomed by the crew. Caswell will be the voice here in Mission Control Houston that walks the crew through the welcome ceremony. Again, that will be the formal greeting. We'll see all 11 crew members aboard Expedition 72 in Node 2 of the station. This is at the very forward end, and it is the forward hatch that will be opened and is opened currently, the Node 2 forward hatch. and where Dragon Endurance is currently docked, the forward end of the space station. It is the teams here that are walking the astronauts through the procedures to open up those hatches. Views are expected to be regained from space momentarily. It is Butch Wilmore who is tasked with the responsibility of the hatch opening procedures. You can see the Node 2 forward hatch. Now that we have views again, the white circle deeper into the hatch, and that pathway down there behind the hatch is called the pressurized mating adapter. It's that white hatch right there that is the A-pass hatch.
Station Houston on the big loop for Butch. Expect approximately 10 more minutes before we're ready to press.
Copy, 10 minutes.
Prior to Dragon's arrival at the International Space Station, the International Docking Adapter, which is on the other side of the hatch, just right there, has been exposed to vacuum and the harsh conditions of space, being exposed to intense sunlight and sunsets, plus 200 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit in sun and shade, respectively. Because of this, this introduces some significant thermal constraints and thermal conditions in that vestibule. Now, when Dragon docks, that vestibule is at vacuum, and the task here is to bring, you can sort of see the black structure on the right of your screen there. That's the pressurized mating adapter. Of course, Dragon, you can see that there. But the white in the middle, that's the International Docking Adapter. That is that vestibule. It is that section there that needs to be pressurized up to 14.7 pounds per square inch. What the teams here are relaying is that those thermal conditions need to dampen out. If they were to pressurize now, there would be too much fluctuation to accurately read if there is indeed a leak. Could it be a leak, or could it be the thermal fluctuations from the intense environment that was in that vestibule? We're taking a pause from our commentary here. Flight Director Allison Bollinger is addressing the teams for some of the upcoming procedures for today. We're just listening in.
Dragon on the big loop in Dragon procedure 4.012, step 5, alpha 6, suits are drying.
Copy, we're with you for suit drying. Dragon, at this time, you have a go for sections 1 through 3 of 4.400.
Sections 1 through 3 of 4.400.
Good read back.
As we get live views from here at Mission Control Houston, the calls you heard were of Commander Ann McLean inside Dragon Endurance, speaking with the core, the equivalent Capcom role over at Mission Control, the SpaceX's Mission Control over in Hawthorne, California. You heard that they completed their suit doffing and are now drying their suits, setting them aside, going through the next steps of procedures. Meanwhile, inside the International Space Station, the crew is preparing, the Expedition 72 crew is preparing for Crew-10's arrival. An excited NASA astronaut Sonny Williams, with camera in tow, getting ready to welcome the crew. Ivan Wagner and Alexander Gorbanov here in view as well. It'll be the entire Expedition 72 that greets Crew-10 as they enter through the hatch.
Dragon Houston on the big loop, stand by for hardline audio config.
Dragon copy, standing by.
Station Houston on the big loop for Butch, you are go in step 3.1.
Decimal 1.
And Dragon Houston on the big loop, com check, hardline audio config complete.
Houston Dragon, I have you loud and clear. How me?
Loud and clear, talk.
One's complete.
Houston copies.
I'll just wait for your go at 3.2.
Copy. Station Houston on the big loop. Butch, you are go in step 3.2.
3.2. Houston, 3.3 was 5:03 on the time, and we're waiting our 5 minutes.
Houston copies.
This is Mission Control Houston. You're getting a live view inside the International Space Station. Expedition 72 crew members gathering inside No. 2, smiles across the board, waiting in anticipation for welcoming the crew aboard the International Space Station. So what the crew is doing right now is, of course, on the timeline really is the welcome of Crew-10 to the International Space Station. Now in the back end there of the pressurized mating adapter, you can see the hatch, and there's sort of center of your view. This is where we're going to see Crew-10 being welcomed. The hatch on the far end there is called the A-Pass hatch. This is on the station side. That one, they're still waiting for a go to go ahead and open that up. There's still another hatch once the A-Pass hatch is open. That's the Dragon hatch. That's the time that we'll report that hatches are open. There are 3 that are needed to connect the Dragon crew with the station crew. The A-Pass hatch, of course, on the other side is the vestibule. Once the vestibule is pressurized from vacuum up to the same pressure that's inside the International Space Station, that's 14.7 psi, we should be expecting NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, who is the astronaut tasked with hatch opening procedures, to go through.
We're showing 5 minutes. We're going to open the hatch.
Houston copies.
And there you have it. Butch Wilmore saying 5 minutes, he's going to open the hatch. There he goes, floating through the pressurized mating adapter, working on hatch opening procedures now. Expecting, he already reported down to Houston, responding here in the room. Capcom, Tess Caswell. We should expect that to be open in 5 minutes. So the vestibule is pressurized, and that means that it will expose the vestibule and we'll be able to see through the APAS hatch to the Dragon hatch. Now you'll notice it's the Dragon hatch because this hatch, of course, will be opened, but the Dragon hatch has a window at the center of the hatch. We may be able to see small views of the Crew-10 astronauts poking their head through, maybe a couple of waves. Of course, it's pretty crowded now. Some excited Expedition 72 astronauts and cosmonauts awaiting the Crew-10's arrival. Wilmore now working through those procedures now. You can see he's wearing gloves and inspecting the area for any debris. This is a very carefully choreographed set of procedures that he's undergoing right now. Yvonne Wagner and Sonny Williams photographing each other, of course, but the cameras they have in tow, some will be used for engineering purposes to photograph and inspect some areas of the hatchway. These will be sent down to the ground and analyzed by engineers to make sure that everything is good. Part of the standard procedures that are necessary for opening up the hatches.
Houston on 2, seals look good, no condensation.
Houston copies.
Station hatch is now open.
And Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground for crew status.
Hey, Mike, it's Vapor on Dragon to Ground. Go ahead.
Hey, Vapor. Just wanted to check in since I see Butch and Nick are moving pretty close through the vestibule pressurization and those tasks there. So just wanted to get a status on your guys from inventory report. And I see about 20 minutes on suit drying and just wanted to check in.
Yep, we're tracking about 20 minutes on suit drying as well. You've got 1.5 of us changed, and then the other 2 are doing the inventory and packing right now, and we'll get you the water and food inventory soon.
Okay, SpaceX copies all.
So as a readback, you can hear the crew inside Dragon speaking with the core that's over at SpaceX's Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. The crew on the other side of the Dragon hatch does have some procedures to go through. You heard they have some time on the suit drying, and then they have additional procedures ahead of them before they open up their hatch.
Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground.
Kirill, I've got you 5 by 5 on Dragon aground, and I am ready to copy the inventory report.
Yes, all right. That's what I'm calling for. So we had water from station 11 and 12. From 202, we had 5 bottles. Them. For 203, 5 bottles. For back 204, 4 bottles.
Okay, I copy bag 202 and 203 were 5 bottles each, and 204 was 4 bottles.
Affirm. Now let's go through food consumption. We went through all our supplies for the day 1. So bags 301, 302, 303, 304 are empty.
I copy. 301 through 304 are all empty.
Affirm.
Houston, we're up to step 4.9. Station's ready for Dragon hatch equalization.
Houston copies.
This is Mission Control Houston, continuing to work through the hatch opening procedures. Outside of some of the channels that we patched through, that's part of the Big Loop communications. You could hear Sonny Williams and Don Pettit use a microphone to set up for the welcome ceremony that will be occurring shortly after Dragon hatch is opened. Once again, the 8-pass hatch is opened. You can see the crew in the back has been configuring the hatch. Once it's opened, they scan the area for any FOD or foreign object debris, and they photograph some of the area. That was some of the flashes you were seeing. Those images are downlinked to teams here on the ground, engineers that analyze and make sure that everything's safe. As precautionary measures, they detach the docking target. That's an extended pole that sticks out from the center of the 8-pass hatch on the other side that was used as literally the target that we saw. as Dragon was approaching the forward hatch. So that was removed. The hatch itself is covered with some fabric. All of these safety measures to protect the crew as they ingress into the International Space Station and again are greeted by the Expedition 72 crew. Now on the other side of the hatch, the Dragon crew has their own set of procedures, while the station crew is focused on ensuring that hatch opening procedures are underway. They go through those step-by-step written procedures that have been directed and sent up to them from the ground to make sure they're doing everything safely. The same thing is happening on the Dragon side. The teams in Hawthorne, SpaceX teams, are walking the Dragon crew through their closeout procedures. They have to dry their suits. They have to change into their garments that they'll wear for the welcome ceremony, similar to, polos and attire that you see here. We'll see the Dragon crew wearing, ideally, something similar, and they'll.
Dragon on the big loop.
Go ahead for Dragon on the big loop.
Hey, can you open your cover to the hatch window cover?
Stand by. Give us about 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
The excitement in the International Space Station is real. Sonny Williams. Over the big loop, again, the big loop configures the audio channels such that the crew inside the station can communicate directly with the crew inside Dragon. At the same time, those audio loops are patched through to control centers here in Houston, as well as the SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. Everybody can talk on this loop. Sonny Williams, of course, eager to greet Crew-10 and welcome them aboard. As we mentioned, the SpaceX teams are walking the Dragon crew through their closeout procedures. Again, there's that little window that they can see through. Expedition 72 very eager to see 4 new crewmates and welcome them to the Expedition 72. When they enter and start their formal welcome ceremony, we will see all Expedition 72 astronauts and cosmonauts in this view that you're seeing right now. There will be 11 crew members aboard the International Space Station at the same time. This is Mission Control Houston. You're getting a live view from inside the International Space Station. Now, we get these incremental handover periods as the International Space Station orbits 17,500 miles per hour over the Earth. They're communicating with several geosynchronous satellites that are positioned also around the Earth and have to point the antenna in a certain way. So these handovers are anticipated as we hand over from satellite to satellite. Nick Hague and many of the other astronauts, of course, working through, eagerly awaiting to greet the Crew-10 astronauts. You saw the mask that Hague was donning. That is still Hague. He and the other crew members are working through the procedures. Though they are quite excited, you can hear the tone of the crew on board.
Go ahead on the big loop.
Okay, we are complete through section 5 of 4.400 and ready for hatch equalization. And then for 4.012, we're tracking 42 minutes of suit dry time in section 5.
And copy Dragon, standby 1. And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. At this time, you guys are go for hatch opening per decal, followed by your remaining actions in section 6 of 4.400.
Dragon copies, go for Dragon forward hatch and then remaining steps in section 6.
Good readback.
So you heard that call on the big loop. Crew inside Endurance is getting ready to open up that hatch. Of course, the crew Expedition 72 crew has gone through their procedures to safely open up the hatch. You saw a couple of photographs. You see in frame there on the bottom left, Yvonne Wagner doing some closeout photography, as well as a few of the other Expedition 72 crew. Now it's up to the Crew-10 cadre to open up the Dragon hatch. Once that hatch is open, all hatches between the two spacecraft will be open and Crew-10 will be able to float through. Now, oftentimes, there has been a gap in time from when the Dragon hatch is open to when we actually see the crew float through. It will be at the crew's discretion and the timeline that they have with the Hawthorne teams on some of the closeout procedures that are necessary inside the Dragon cabin before they can say yea verily that they can float through and be welcomed, start the ceremony. So we'll just stand by, listen in, see how they're doing, and follow along. We're continuing our nonstop coverage of Crew-10's arrival aboard the International Space Station ahead of a formal welcome ceremony as Crew-10 joins Expedition 72.
SpaceX Dragon, hatch is open.
SpaceX copies, hatch open at 0535 UTC.
And there it is, confirmation that the Dragon hatch is open. That time of hatch opening is 12:35 a.m. Central Time on March 16th, 2025.
Dragon on the big loop.
Go ahead, talk.
We are in step 6.1 of the procedure 2.102 Crew Dragon ISS and IMV that's installation complete, and you guys go for IMV fan activation.
Houston copies.
Houston Dragon, do we have a go for LIO cartridge config?
Checking.
Standing by for words from Expedition 72. You see the bell in position that will be rung. Audio will be streamed down of the bell welcoming the crew. More Expedition 72 members coming through.
Dragon Houston, you are go in step 6.3.
We go for step 6.3.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, be advised that S-band will be deactivated shortly. Dragon to ground will no longer be available for comm.
Dragon copy. SpaceX Dragon on the big loop for LIO.
Go ahead for LIO.
LIO cartridge is sealed and installed. LIO cartridge 1 is now in active slot with the field.
We copy. LIO cartridge 1 is sealed and installed in the active slot at approximately 0542 UTC.
That's good copy.
Crew-10 mission specialist Takuya Onishi confirming some of the closeout procedures. There is a reason why we are waiting for Crew-10 to enter the International Space Station. They do have very important closeout duties inside Endurance. Those lithium hydroxide canisters are consumable carbon dioxide scrubbers inside the cabin of Dragon. So they do want to conserve those carbon dioxide scrubbers, and so before entering the International Space Station, they do want to make sure they conserve the LIO cartridges as much as possible. So that is a very important closeout duty that they have aboard Dragon before they enter. But it seems like we do have the first Crew-10 Onishi, the first Crew-10 astronaut through the hatch, followed by Peskov, Nicole Ayers, the first of the Fly's newest class of astronauts to enter, and last, commander of Crew-10, Anne McLean.
SpaceX Crew-10, welcome aboard the ISS.
Well, hey, everybody down there on Earth.
You're not hot on the mic. I know. Is the receiver?
Oh, yeah, we're on.
Okay, got it. Okay.
All right,
They changed at the last minute.
Got it.
Thought I lost my touch there for a sec. Hey, Crew-10 has had a great journey up here, about 28 hours to get back up to the space station, and I cannot tell you the immense joy of our crew when we looked out the window and we saw the space station for the first time. Returning for a couple of people, very first time for a couple of people. And let me tell you, that is such an amazing journey. You can hardly even put it into words. The ride up on the Falcon 9, orbiting the Earth for the last couple of days, it's been absolutely incredible, and it is something that none of us could do by ourselves. As we've said before, you cannot be great without the greatness of others, and I tell you, the greatness of the ground control teams have really shined through in the last few days getting us up here safely. Thank you very, very much.
Hey, from the bottom of my heart, thanks to our families, friends, and our colleagues from all the partners, SpaceX, NASA, CSA, ESA, Roscosmos, and JAXA for preparing us and making it possible for us to get here. And we are so excited to now be officially part of the Expedition 72. Thank you guys. And I want to say a couple of words in Japanese from here. 日本の皆さん応援ありがとうございました。元気にここまで ISS まで帰ってくることができました。明日からまた、一生懸命、希望でのサイエンスと含めていろんなタスクを頑張っていきたいと思います。ぜひ応援よろしくお願いします。
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot one more time to SpaceX and NASA for this wonderful ride. That was really fun. And thanks to all the world's aerospace industry, which works to make the dreams to come true and to take us further and further. That's really wonderful. Thanks to everyone working there. И спасибо, конечно же, отдельно это Роскосмосу и Центру подготовки космонавтов за знания и опыт, которые привели меня сюда. Будем работать славно, работать дружно. Во имя, во благо всего человечества. Передаю микрофон. Потерялся.
I'd like to just say again, thank you to SpaceX for the awesome ride up here. As a rookie, that was one of the coolest things I've ever done, and I can't wait to get to work up here. So excited for the 4 pilots and us that just got to get to space together, and now we're 4 astronauts together. So thank you to all of our friends and families, and thank you to all of the instructors and all of the ground teams who got us here. Can't wait to get started.
And Houston, thank you for tuning in this early morning. It was a wonderful day. Great to see our friends arrive. So thank you so much.
Thanks to all participants. Station, we're now resuming operational audio comm.
Si te gusta nuestro contenido, por favor déjenos un like y suscríbase a nuestro canal tocando la campanita debajo. Y acuérdese de compartir nuestros videos con su familia y amistades.
Con la solución, progreso y fuerza en nuestra dirección. Juntos cambiamos esta nación. En la frontera están protegiéndonos. Kamala y yo solo mintiéndonos. Queremos trabajo, futuro y paz. Con Trump es el líder con la solución. Progreso y fuerza en nuestra dirección. Juntos cambiamos esta nación. Cambiamos esta nación. En la frontera Trump protegiéndonos. Kamala y yo solo mintiéndonos. Queremos trabajo, futuro y paz. Trump es el líder con la solución. Trump es el líder con la solución.
Vote for Grandpa.
Make America great again.
La grandeza es para cualquiera, dispuesto a luchar por ello.
Trump es líder con la solución.